Ethan Parker's life looked stable from the outside, but inside he felt like everything was slowly falling apart. He lived in a quiet suburb outside Seattle where the streets were clean and the houses looked perfect. He still followed the same routine every day: wake up early, make coffee, go to work, come back home, and sit through silent dinners with his wife Claire. But the silence between them had grown heavier with every passing month. It was not always like this. There was a time when Claire used to laugh easily, talk freely, and hold his hand while watching movies, but those moments felt like a distant memory now. Over time she became distant, distracted, and harder to read. She started staying late at work more often, answering calls outside the room, and avoiding long conversations. Ethan tried to ignore the changes at first because he believed marriage meant patience and understanding. He told himself every couple goes through rough phases, but deep down he felt something had shifted in a way he could not fix. One morning while getting ready for work, he saw a message pop up on Claire's phone while she was in the shower. It was brief but enough to shake him. The message said, "I miss you already." There was no name attached, no explanation, just those words that sat in his mind like a weight he could not drop. He wanted to ask her about it, but he stayed silent, afraid of what the answer might be. Days passed and his thoughts became restless. He found himself overthinking small things like her sudden smiles at her phone or her quick exits from rooms when he entered. The trust between them did not break all at once. It faded slowly like light dimming at sunset. Ethan began feeling like a stranger in his own home, someone who shared space but not truth. That evening everything changed because a heavy storm hit the city. Rain fell in thick sheets and wind shook the trees. Ethan left work late and drove through wet roads with tired eyes. His mind was full of questions he did not want to answer. The roads became harder to see as lightning flashed across the sky. He felt overwhelmed and needed a break from his thoughts. That is when he noticed a small cafe glowing warmly at the corner of a quiet street. The sign above it read Harbor Street Cafe. The light inside looked calm and safe compared to the storm outside. He hesitated for a moment but then parked his car. Telling himself he just needed a few minutes to clear his head, he stepped inside and felt the warmth immediately. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the air. Soft music played in the background, and a few people sat quietly near the windows. It felt like a different world, calmer and slower. He removed his wet jacket and looked for a seat when he noticed someone familiar sitting in the corner. It was Diane Whitmore, his mother-in-law, Claire's mother. She looked surprised to see him but also calm, as if fate had placed them there on purpose. Diane had always been polite but distant in his life, someone who smiled at family gatherings but never stayed too long in deep conversations. Tonight she looked different, more thoughtful, almost tired. She gestured for him to sit across from her and he agreed because there was nowhere else he wanted to go at that moment. They exchanged polite words at first, talking about the storm, the traffic, and how unpredictable the weather had become, but underneath the small talk was something heavier. Neither of them addressed. Ethan noticed she kept looking at him carefully as if trying to read his emotions, and Diane noticed how exhausted he looked, like a man carrying more than he could speak about. The silence between them slowly became comfortable instead of awkward, and for the first time that night Ethan felt slightly less alone. He did not know why he chose to stay longer at that table. Maybe it was the storm outside or maybe it was the strange calm in her voice, but something about that moment felt important even though he could not explain it yet. Diane asked him a simple question about how he had been lately, and that question lingered in the air longer than expected because no one had asked him that in a sincere way for a long time. Ethan smiled faintly but did not answer fully. Instead he looked out the window at the rain hitting the glass and felt like his life was slowly changing direction without warning. The cafe felt like a pause in reality, a place where truth might slip out without permission, and as the storm continued outside, neither of them realized that this chance meeting was not just coincidence. It was the beginning of a conversation that would soon uncover truths Ethan was not ready to face, truths about his marriage, about Claire, and about the people he thought he knew best. And as the night deepened, The simple decision to step into a cafe during a storm began to feel like the moment everything in his life started to shift in a way he could never take back again. Diane and Ethan sat in the quiet cafe while the storm outside grew stronger, rain hitting the windows like restless thoughts that neither of them could escape. At first they spoke only about simple things like the weather and the long drive home, but the silence between sentences carried something heavier, something unspoken that both of them could feel. Ethan kept staring at his coffee without drinking it, while Diane gently turned her cup in slow circles as if gathering courage for something difficult. She looked at him more carefully now, not like a polite family member but like someone trying to decide how much truth should be spoken in one night. Finally she asked him a question in a soft voice, not about the storm or work, but about him, about how he was really doing, and that question hit Ethan harder than expected because no one had asked him that in a long time, not in a way that felt real. He gave a small tired smile and said he was fine, but the word did not feel honest even as he said it. Diane did not accept that answer easily. She studied his face and saw the exhaustion he had been hiding behind routine and silence. She leaned back slightly and took a slow breath, then her expression changed, as if something inside her had reached a point where staying quiet was no longer possible. She asked him gently if things at home were okay with Claire. The moment she said Claire's name, Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. He looked away toward the window where rain blurred the lights outside. He did not answer immediately, and that silence told Diane more than words ever could. She lowered her eyes and said his name softly, almost like an apology before truth. Then she told him something that changed everything he believed about his marriage. She said Claire had not been honest for a long time, that she had seen signs for months but tried to ignore them because she did not want to destroy the family. Ethan felt the room grow quieter even though the cafe was still around them. He asked what she meant, his voice steady but low, and Diane hesitated again before finally speaking the words she had been holding in for too long. She told him Claire was involved with someone else, not a guess, not a rumor, but something she had quietly confirmed through conversation she could no longer avoid. Ethan went still, his hands stopped moving, and for a moment he forgot to breathe properly. The sound of the storm outside felt distant, like it belonged to another world. He asked when it started, and Diane told him it had been going on for several months, maybe longer. She said she tried to believe Claire would stop, that it was a mistake, but it never ended. Each word landed heavily, but Diane's voice stayed calm because she knew breaking down would not change the truth. Ethan felt a strange mix of shock and clarity, as if a part of him had already known but refused to accept it. He remembered the late nights, the phone turned face down, the sudden distance in her eyes, and now everything connected in a way that hurt deeply. He leaned back and looked at the ceiling for a moment, trying to process it without losing control. Diane reached across the table slowly and placed her hand near his, not forcing contact but offering quiet support. She told him she was sorry, not just as a mother but as someone who had watched everything happen from the edges. She said she should have told him earlier but fear and denial kept her silent. Ethan finally looked at her again, not with anger, but with a tired sadness. He said he did not even know what part hurt more, the betrayal or the fact that it had been hidden from him for so long. Diane's eyes filled slightly but she stayed composed. She told him she never wanted him to feel like he was alone in this. Ethan nodded slowly because even though the truth hurt, there was something strange about hearing it out loud, something that made it real instead of confusing. Outside, lightning flashed again, and for a moment both of them looked toward the window in silence. Ethan asked if Claire knew that Diane was telling him this, and Diane shook her head, saying she had not confronted Claire directly in a way that made everything collapse. She had only seen enough to understand the direction things were going. Ethan sat forward again, rubbing his hands together as if trying to steady himself. His mind was racing but his voice stayed calm. He asked Diane why she was telling him now, and she said because she could no longer carry the weight of pretending everything was normal. Because watching him suffer in silence had become harder than breaking the illusion. The cafe around them felt quieter now even though nothing had changed. Ethan realized he was sitting in front of someone who had been part of his family for years but was now the only person telling him the truth. It was painful but also strangely grounding. He did not know what his next step would be, but something inside him shifted, like a door closing behind him that he could not reopen. Diane looked at him and said softly that whatever he decided, he should not blame himself for not seeing it sooner. Ethan nodded again but did not respond, because in that moment he understood that his marriage was no longer something uncertain or confusing. It was already broken in ways he could not repair, and as the storm continued outside, the cafe became a place where truth had finally caught up with him, leaving him sitting across from the one person who had unknowingly changed the direction of his life forever. After that night in the cafe, Ethan's life did not return to normal, because normal no longer existed for him. He went back home in silence, parked his car outside the familiar house, and sat there for a long time before going inside. Everything looked the same, the lights, the furniture, the photos on the wall, but nothing felt the same anymore. Claire was not home that night, and for the first time Ethan did not feel panic about it, only a quiet emptiness. He walked through the house slowly, noticing how many parts of his life had been shared with someone who was already drifting away from him. Diane's words kept repeating in his mind, not like loud accusations, but like a steady truth he could not escape. He slept very little that night, and when morning came, he felt strangely calm, as if something inside him had already accepted what his heart had been refusing for months. Over the next few days, Claire returned home later than usual, acting distant but controlled. She spoke less, avoided eye contact, and treated their conversations like formal exchanges. Ethan no longer asked questions, because he already knew the answers would not change anything. Instead he began watching her quietly, not out of anger, but out of final understanding. One evening she finally said it directly, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. She told him she did not feel the same anymore, that she had been confused for a long time, and that she thought it was better to end things peacefully rather than continue pretending. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed, like she had been practicing those words for weeks. Ethan listened without interrupting, and for the first time he did not argue, did not try to fix it, did not ask her to stay, because somewhere deep inside he knew the marriage had already ended long before that conversation. After she left the room, Ethan stayed seated for a long time, staring at the empty space in front of him, not feeling anger, only a slow acceptance that felt heavier than pain. The divorce process began quietly after that. No dramatic fights, no loud arguments, just paperwork, silence, and long pauses where both of them avoided looking back. During that time Diane stayed in contact, at first through short messages checking if he was okay, then through occasional phone calls that slowly became longer conversations. Ethan did not fully understand why he kept answering, but something about her voice made him feel less alone. She never pushed him, never asked for more than he could give. She simply stayed present in a way that felt steady. As weeks passed, Ethan started rebuilding his routine, but everything felt different, like life had shifted slightly off its original path. He went for long drives, ate alone, and tried to focus on work, yet his thoughts often drifted back to that cafe, to the night everything changed, and to Diane sitting across from him with the weight of truth in her eyes. One rainy evening, months later, he found himself driving again without purpose and stopped near Harbor Street Cafe, the same place where everything had started falling apart and quietly coming together at the same time. He sat inside by the window, watching the rain fall, and for the first time he did not feel lost there. A few minutes later, Diane walked in, as if she had been expected. She saw him and paused for a second before smiling gently, not surprised, just calm. She sat across from him again, but this time the silence between them felt different, not heavy, but understood. They talked slowly, carefully, not about pain anymore, but about life after it, about moving forward, about learning to breathe again. Ethan noticed how easy it had become to talk to her, how naturally she understood pauses without needing explanations. There was no rush in their conversation, no pressure to define anything, just two people sharing space after surviving something difficult. Outside, the rain softened, and the cafe lights reflected softly on the glass. Diane told him she had been afraid of this moment for a long time, not because of judgment, but because of consequences she could not predict. Ethan looked at her quietly and said he did not regret knowing the truth, even if it hurt, because living in illusion had hurt more. Their eyes met for a moment that felt honest and steady, not romantic in words, but emotional in understanding. Something unspoken passed between them, something built from shared loneliness and quiet support rather than sudden change. Ethan did not try to label it, and neither did Diane, because both of them understood that not everything in life needed to be defined immediately. Some things only needed to be felt and respected for what they were in the moment. As the night grew deeper, Ethan realized he was no longer the same man who had driven into a storm looking for shelter. He had gone through loss, truth, and silence, and somehow come out with clarity, not about love, but about honesty and starting over. And as he sat there with Diane across from him, he understood that life had taken something away from him, but had also shown him something unexpected, that even after betrayal and endings, there could still be moments of connection that helped a person heal in ways they never planned for. And in that quiet cafe, as the rain finally began to stop, Ethan felt for the first time that he might be able to move forward, not because everything was fixed, but because he had finally stopped running from what was real.